Hi everybody, I'm Carolyn Roberts and I'm a lecturer at the University of Lausanne. This is joint work with Jessica Herzing, also at the University of Lausanne, and Force, and at the University of Bern, and Danielle Gattaca Perez at IDIAP Research Centre in EPFL in Switzerland. And this paper is called Data Privacy Concerns as a Source of Resistance to Participate in Surveys Using a Smartphone App. Now, there's growing interest in the use of smartphone apps as a way to collect data in surveys and other types of social research. And one of the motivations for this is that smartphone apps offer a kind of win-win for researchers and for respondents alike. On the one hand, for researchers, there's the possibility to combine survey data from questionnaires with other forms of data, which might be data that have been actively provided by respondents, like photographs or videos, but it may also be passively collected data from the device itself, from smartphone sensors and other sources, for example. And then from the respondent's perspective, the hope is that somehow, maybe if we can collect data from other sources, we can reduce the need for so many self-report measures in surveys. We may be able to make surveys more fun and more interesting, and the fact that it's on someone's smartphone means that there's the possibility that they can carry it out more easily or participate in studies more easily whilst on the go, and that this somehow may fit with their typical smartphone behaviours in a way. So in principle, smartphone app-based surveys should be a win-win for researchers and for respondents, but research to date finds that there are very high levels of resistance to participating in surveys on smartphones, and in particular to using apps to participate in surveys and agreeing to share passive data with researchers. So why is that? Well, there's a growing number of studies that have been published over the last couple of years that have identified three main reasons for resistance. One is task characteristics. So depending on what we're asking people to do, it may be that there's some variation in willingness to participate. So for example, depending on how much burden the task places on the respondent or how intrusive or the task is perceived to be, for example. Respondents' behavioural characteristics or linked to their ability to complete tasks on a smartphone, for example, the device characteristics, their own familiarity with their device, their usage habits, their time constraints, and so on. And then there are attitudinal characteristics that influence the motivation to participate in research, and this may be general attitudes to surveys that affect willingness to participate in surveys generally. But more specifically, researchers found that there's evidence to suggest that people's concerns around data privacy with using mobile data collection technologies and the security of the data that they provide in such studies is a strong factor influencing willingness or resistance to participate in app-based studies. So there are lots of open questions in this field of research. In particular, there's not much research on general population samples to date, especially probability-based cross-sectional surveys. The research to date has tended to be based on longitudinal surveys and panel participants. Studies to date have tended to focus more on hypothetical willingness to participate in app-based surveys and share passive data, and there have been fewer studies that have actually used an app to collect data. Studies have tended to focus on quite specific mobile data collection tasks and technologies. For example, people's willingness to have their GPS tracked, or willingness to take photographs, or scan shopping receipts and so on. And there's certainly not been any prior research on app survey methodology in the Swiss context, or at least there had not been at the time in which we conducted this research. And although we know that data privacy concerns appear to play a key role in influencing willingness to participate in app-based surveys, we don't know much about the correlates of data privacy concerns and how data privacy concerns vary across different population characteristics. And we don't know much about their impact on the quality of the data, although we know that in principle it should have an important impact on non-response bias and on measurement quality. And another thing we don't know is really what we can do as survey designers to offset people's concerns about privacy, and what we can do in the survey design itself to try to persuade people to participate in spite of their concerns. So in terms of implications, if data privacy concerns are correlated with respondent characteristics, they could of course introduce bias in the sample composition. If they're correlated with key survey variables, then data privacy concerns could result in biased estimates, and most obviously this relates to our measures of data privacy concerns themselves. And if people with data privacy concerns are harder to recruit to surveys, then they may also be likely to give answers that contain more measurement error. They may have more tendency to give socially desirable answers, or to skip certain questions they consider sensitive. And they may similarly refuse to consent to data linkage for specific items as well. So we really need to understand how we can offset data privacy concerns in order to be able to capitalise on the benefits presented by app-based surveys. So let me say something about the research design. So we have two general research questions that I'm going to talk about here in this study. So the first one was, how do data privacy concerns vary among different population subgroups and as a function of internet and smartphone usage habits in particular? And the second one was, to what extent do expressed data privacy concerns predict stated willingness to participate in app-based surveys involving passive data collection, but also actual willingness to participate? And we were able to investigate or to address these research questions through a study in which we made use of an existing data collection app that had been developed by our colleagues at EPFL and IDIAP Research Centre called Civic.org. Civic.org is a data collection platform that was designed with a kind of citizen science project in mind, with the idea that different researchers could upload different challenges to the app or different questionnaires to the app to allow existing participants to fill in. We used the application in the context of the Swiss election studies, which was carried out in the federal election year 2019 in Switzerland, the SELECT survey. So it was called SELECT Civic, and the design was such that we had one general population sample that was randomly assigned to two groups, Group 1 and Group 2, and it's a three-wave survey, the SELECT study, and we ran this study alongside the main SELECT survey. So at Wave 1, which was a pre-election study conducted in June 2019, we had Group 1 assigned to a web browser condition, and Group 2 was invited to participate using the Civic app, and it was a kind of push-to-app design. If people didn't participate via the app, then they were later offered the possibility to use their browser. At Wave 2, during the election campaign, they were invited to participate in another wave of data collection, and Group 1 was at that point invited to use the app. Group 2 continued to use the app or their browser if they preferred, and at Wave 3 both groups were again invited back to the app or to use their browser depending on what their preferences were. So in this study I'm mainly interested in Wave 1 and Wave 2 data, and I'm focusing on Group 1 only, mainly because we wanted to look at this stated willingness to use an app at Wave 1 and the actual willingness to use the app at Wave 2. So just a little bit more detail about the design. So the target population was Swiss citizens aged 18 and over because it was a voting study, and we only focused on French-speaking municipalities due to a reduced budget. And we had a random probability-based survey sample from the Swiss Federal Statistical Office, who maintains a sampling frame based on population registers. The topics of the questionnaire were political opinions, voting behaviour and media use, but we also included questions on internet and smartphone usage and data privacy concerns, as well as willingness to complete different types of data collection tasks and to participate in the survey using an app to do other tasks like taking photographs or to share their GPS location. So the questionnaire was organised into modules. The order was fixed on the web, and within the app the respondents had the possibility to choose which modules they filled out and when. So it looked something like this. This was the first wave of the study, and there were 9 different modules, and they each had different titles there, and the respondent could pick and choose which one to respond to first. This is just some examples of what questions look like within the app. So it had a nice visual design and layout. More details, we had multiple contact attempts, of course. Wave 1 had a 10 franc unconditional incentive, and wave 2, the incentive was conditional on completing modules within the app, so you could receive up to 20 Swiss francs, so that was 2 francs per module. Sponsored was the University of Lausanne, and we had to ask for consent using a sort of consent form built into the app that had to be signed electronically, and this was approved by the Human Research Ethics Committee at EPFL. The passive data we collected were GPS location when the app was opened, selected app logs, so apps that were installed on people's phones, and of course some kind of process data like timestamps of when they used the Civic app and other selected apps on their smartphone. We conducted some user experience research alongside the survey, so this included 3 focus groups exploring smartphone use and data privacy concerns, and then we followed that up with usability testing of focus group participants using the Civic app and testing the different survey tasks that they were asked to complete, which included things like activating the GPS and also taking photographs and some other related tasks. Some results. So in terms of the response rates, you can see that the Wave 1 response rates were only slightly lower in the app group than they were in the web browser group, around 26% compared to 30%. And at Wave 2, this is the proportion of people responding of those who participated at Wave 1. So again, they were quite similar. We had around half, just over half the sample responding at Wave 2 compared to at Wave 1, and it was slightly higher in the app group than it was in the browser group. So the mode switch had a negative impact on participation. We can break these response rates down by device. So we had 12.3% of the sample responding on a mobile device in group 1, and then we can see the proportions in the app and the using the app and the browser in the remaining groups. And actually mobile response was very low, so mobile browser response was very low in each of the groups where the app was offered. So we have multiple measures of data privacy concerns. Firstly, some general concerns about data privacy, so how worried people were that websites and apps were collecting their personal information, agreeing that the internet poses a threat to privacy. And as you can see, we have a kind of majority of the sample agreeing with these statements or reporting that they felt worried. Just flagging up some quotes from the focus group which sort of illustrate how these attitudes sort of manifested themselves in everyday discourse. So generally speaking, 2 to 3 years ago, I realised that as long as I have a smartphone in my hands, there's nothing private anymore. So the fact that people are quite resigned to the loss of data privacy, we believe is kind of reflected in these high proportions of people just sort of reporting concerns about data privacy. And this is also reflected in concerns about the consequences of sharing data, so how concerned people are that data will go to third parties, that they'll be sent targeted advertisements, or that their identity might be stolen. Again, some quotes to illustrate that. The final set of measures were designed to measure perceptions of the sensitivity of different data types, and respondents were asked how comfortable they felt sharing different types of data. As you can see, comfort levels were quite high, generally speaking, so these are the proportions of people not comfortable sharing 3 types of data which were very specifically relevant to this study, so sharing admin data from registers, sharing political opinions, and passive data on a smartphone. Okay, our first set of analyses were predicting general concerns about data privacy, concerns about the consequences of sharing data, and then we combine these measures into an aggregate measure of overall data privacy concerns. And we were interested here in simple socio-demographic correlates. I'm not going to present the numbers just because we don't have time in a presentation like this, so I'm going to cut straight through to the take-home messages. So in fact, we found not much variation in data privacy attitudes when considering socio-demographic characteristics. Women and older people were slightly more concerned about potential negative consequences of sharing data online, and in particular they were concerned about having their identity stolen. And one interesting finding was that interest in politics, although not really a socio-demographic correlate, but because of the topic of the survey being about politics, we felt it was important to include this as a control. But we found that it seems to moderate expressed concern. So the more people reported being interested in politics, the less concerned they were. And so we wonder whether topic interest in surveys may offset worries about worries that may be made salient by the survey design. However, we have quite small sample sizes, so unfortunately we do not find strong effects in the socio-demographic measures. And this made us also wonder whether we shouldn't consider our attitude measures separately rather than aggregating them in the way that we have. The second set of questions looked at smartphone usage correlates of data privacy concerns. So we were interested in things like frequency of internet use, devices used, smartphone skills, and so on. The take-home messages were that users of PCs and laptops to connect to the internet seemed to express more general concerns, while mobile respondents were more concerned about the consequences of sharing their data online. And again, we have small sample sizes here, which limits our possibility to detect significant effects amongst these particular variables. And again, we're wondering whether by disaggregating these attitude measures, we may have more sensitive indicators. So finally, the second research question was about willingness to do an app survey, and we had two dependent variables. The first one was hypothetical willingness at wave 1 to download an app in order to complete a questionnaire, and the second one was actual willingness at wave 2 to download an app in order to complete the questionnaires, and we used the same covariates that have been used in the previous models. The take-home messages were that advanced smartphone skills, smartphone use and responding on a mobile positively predicted hypothetical willingness. Being uncomfortable sharing administrative data, political opinions and passive data about smartphone use reduced hypothetical willingness. But small sample sizes, again, especially at wave 2, meant that it wasn't clear whether the same predictors were playing a role in actual willingness or whether the effects are disappearing altogether. So it's not clear whether the same thing is going on with actual willingness as is with hypothetical willingness. But there's some evidence that age differences may be important. So to wrap things up, just going to highlight some limitations. One was that because we had a limited budget, we could only work with relatively small sample sizes, and unfortunately these were compounded by low response rates, especially at wave 2. We had limited space in terms of what measures we could include to measure data privacy attitudes, and given prior research on the kind of framework for data privacy attitudes, I think we could have been more nuanced in our measurement of attitudes. But we do have multiple measures, and we want to do more work disaggregating these and really looking to see how data privacy concerns vary across context and how this may influence behaviour relating to sharing data in those different contexts. So please consider these preliminary analyses as a work in progress, and we're looking forward to sharing more information with you about this research in the future. To sum up, we see despite high reported levels of concern, there seems to be some inconsistency between attitudes and behavioural intentions or behaviours. There are different dimensions of privacy concerns that seem to function differently with respect to the socio-demographic and smartphone usage correlates, so it's not a simple story. And we believe that the specificity of the attitude measures is extremely important for predicting willingness to participate in an app survey, or at least to sharing different types of data in different data contexts. And interestingly, topic interest may moderate concerns about data privacy as a predictor of participation in surveys, as may many other survey design factors and motivators. And so in our future research, we're interested in going further with the leverage salience theory and thinking about how data privacy works or concerns act alongside other variables to kind of counterbalance or to decide someone's survey participation decision. Thank you for your attention.